Swagatam tomater priyo galpara shore, SSTSK channeli jekin pratiti galpo dire tamik ne j ek ano jagot, shanto rohisyamli r anabudate borak jagot. Edgar rata hak shudu tamar r ekti asidharan galper. Tai aram kori shui poro, alo ektu kami dao, r bearer sab shabdo thik nijk ektu dur sorye now, Karen aj amra dire dubjit kolche iman ek galper gobhair, ya tamar kalpanakyo chu jabe. Galpo shiru korar age tomater cake chado ekta anyarad. Tamra I videoti prithibir khan pranto thik deksho, r I muhert shekin sami kodo sheda abashsoy comment lik janib. Raider nearbade tomater comment port amr shot e kub balo lage. Tomater pratiti balabasha, pratiti anaputi r pratiti montabio amik natan galpo nih abar fire ashar anaparona day. R jodi shanto, cinematic r abeghan galpo shunt balo lage, tahol ekhoni SSTSK channel subscribe kori pash thiko. Karen samni arrow wunk gobhir, rohisyami r hridu chui jawa galpo tomater jano opshakorch. To ebar, ekta gobhir nishwas now, chok dudo ekta bondho kori montek shanto kori filo, Karen Edgar Gulpodi Shudhu Shanar Jano Noi Edi Anabhub Kor Jano. I Gulper Pratiti Shabdo, Pratiti Nirboda R Pratiti Muhert Dire Tomik Ne Jabe Ek Odput Rohisir Better Jekin Ek Abeg, Ondakar Shato Araman Kichugatona, Yashesh Porjanto Tomik Babt Bado Korb. Kalan, Ebar Dire Shiru Kora Jack Ajkar Gulpo. Lost in the winter mist, the haveli it was about 200 years ago. Back then there was no electricity in the villages of Bengal. As evening fell, the world would slowly submerge under a massive blanket of darkness. A chilly wind blew through the distant bamboo groves, and the mist descended so thick that a person standing even 10 cubits away could not be seen clearly. In a remote region of Nadia during that time stood a massive mansion, the Shidalpur Haveli. Rumor had it that every wall of this mansion held stories of weeping, betrayal, and unfinished deaths. As majestic as the house looked in the daylight, it became equally terrifying once night fell. Especially during winter. Because the villagers believed that on the coldest nights of the year, a sound would drift from the mansion's old bell tower, a sound that did not belong to the living. That night was just such a night. It was the end of the month of Paush. The mist was so thick all around that even the moonlight could not reach the ground. The scent of dry leaves lingered in the air, foxes howled somewhere in the distance, and whenever the branches of the banyan tree swayed, it felt as though someone was standing in the darkness, silently watching. Inside the haveli, almost everyone was asleep by then. Only one person was awake. His name was Rudra. He wasn't very old, just 24. Although he was the youngest son of the landlord family, his life wasn't like the others. Since childhood, he had been of a quiet nature. He preferred sitting alone by the riverbank or reading old books over being in a crowd of people. But that winter night changed him forever. Rudra was sitting in the old library on the northern side of the haveli. Before him flickered the light of a lamp. Cold air crept in through the cracks of the wooden window, making the entire room even more silent. Suddenly dong, the heavy sound of a bell shook the entire haveli. Rudra looked up with a start. A few seconds later it rang again, dong, dong, the sound was coming from the bell tower. But the problem was, no one had entered that bell tower for the last 20 years. The door had been permanently locked after a terrifying incident. Rudra slowly stood up, and strange uneasiness stirred deep within his chest. Yet curiosity would not let him stop. Holding a flickering kerosene lamp in his hand, he stepped out of the library. The entire corridor was dead silent. In the dim light, the old portraits on the wall looked as if they were alive and staring back. Outside, the cold wind was blowing even harder now. Rudra slowly began to move toward the bell tower. With every single step, the wooden floor creaked. Suddenly, he stopped, because he could clearly hear the sound of someone crying. Very faint, very muffled, as if a woman was weeping from a great distance. Rudra hand began to tremble, not from the cold but from fear. He looked around, but no one was to be seen, only mist and darkness. Right then, the door of the bell tower slowly opened on its own. With a harsh, creaking sound, Kriyak Rudra throat went dry. Inside the doorway was nothing but dense darkness. And standing right in the middle of that darkness was a woman dressed in white clothes. Her long hair was blowing in the wind. Her face could not be seen, But she slowly raised her hand, gesturing for Rudra Narration to come closer, and at that very moment all the lamps in the haveli went out at once. Within moments, the entire haveli was drowned in darkness. As the last flame of the lamp was extinguished, the surroundings became so silent it felt as though someone had suddenly stolen all the sounds in the world. Only somewhere in the distance, bamboo leaves shivered in the cold wind, making a swish-swish sound. Rudra stood frozen. The kerosene lamp held in his hand had gone out. Around him was darkness so dense that his own hand was not visible. But even then, he could feel it. Someone was standing right in front of him. An ice-cold wind slowly whirled around his body. Taking a breath felt like ice was entering his chest. Then a soft female voice drifted in. Rudra's heart gave a jolt, because he had never heard this voice before. Yet strangely, the voice felt very familiar to him, as if some memory lost many years ago had returned from within the darkness. In a trembling voice he said, Who are you?" No answer came. Only the cold wind rushed out of the bell tower more intensely. The scent of old incense was mixed in that wind, and there was a strange smell of wet earth. Suddenly, lightning flashed in the sky. For a single moment, the entire bell tower lit up, and in that 1 second what Rudra saw froze the blood in his veins. The woman in white was not standing on the ground. She was floating in the air. Her 2 feet were slowly swaying in the wind, and her long black hair hung over her face like a dead person's shroud. As the lightning faded, darkness returned. Rudra stepped back a pace. But just then, that female voice drifted in again. This time there was weeping in the voice. "Save me!" Rudra felt a strange pain inside his chest. Amidst the fear he also felt, there was an helplessness in this voice that could not be ignored. He said slowly, "Who are you?" A few seconds of silence. Then from the depth of the darkness the answer came, "I am Nandini." Upon hearing the name, Rudra's body trembled, because he had heard this name before, many years ago. In his childhood, his grandmother used to tell the story of a woman, the story of a cursed woman who had reportedly died right here in this haveli. Nandini, the only daughter of Zamindar Bhavanaprasad. According to folklore, Nandini had loved a common youth, but the Zamindar family did not accept that relationship. On a snow-cold night, the boy was murdered, and early next morning, Nandini's hanging body was found inside the bell tower. From then on, all kinds of strange incidents began. As night fell, the bell would ring, footsteps would be heard in the corridor, and in the winter mist, sometimes a woman in a white sari would be seen. Rudra had considered these stories to be superstitions in his childhood, but today he was seeing everything with his own eyes. Suddenly, a cold hand came out from within the bell tower and gripped Rudra's wrist. Rudra screamed. The hand was cold as ice, but in that touch there was deep sorrow more than fear, as if weeping accumulated for many years was touching his body. Right then, the sound of the dawn azan drifted in from somewhere distant, and instantly that hand vanished. The surrounding air suddenly became normal. Panting, Rudra sat down on the ground, then slowly he realized there was something in his hand. He looked at it with a trembling hand, an old silver anklet. Looking at the blackish tarnish built up on the anklet, it seemed it had been buried underground for many years. But the most terrifying thing was something else. On the inner side of the anklet, a name was engraved. Nandini. Outside, dawn was slowly breaking then. Under the sheet of mist, the entire haveli lay silent as a dead body. But Rudra knew this night was only the beginning. Some secret 200 years old was slowly waking up. And with that truth, his own life also had some strange connection. The next morning, too, the sun did not appear in the sky of Shidalpur haveli. A thick gray mist covered the entire landlord mansion in such a way, as if nature itself wanted to hide this house from the eyes of the world. The branches of the old mango tree in the courtyard were slowly swaying in the cold wind, and the sound of dripping dew drifted from the cornice of the roof. Rudra could not sleep at all for the rest of the night. Before him, on the wooden table, that silver anklet still lay. In the dim morning light, the blackish tarnish of the anklet looked even more terrifying. At times it felt as though the metallic object was not cold, but warm, as if the touch of someone's body still lingered on it. Rudra slowly picked up the anklet in his hand, and right then a very soft whisper drifted close to his ear. "Come back." In fear, Rudra dropped the anklet from his hand. As it hit with a tinging sound, Gadadhar, the old servant standing outside the door, entered with a start. Gadadhar was about 70 years old. He was born right here in this haveli. His father, grandfather, everyone had been servants of this landlord family. The man was usually very quiet, but today clear terror was visible on his face. In a low voice he said, Babu, did you go to the bell tower? Rudra remained silent for a moment and then said, yes. Gadadhar's face turned pale in an instant. I told you not to, that place is not good. Rudra now looked directly at him. Who was Nandini? Upon hearing the question, the old man's hand trembled. For a few seconds he stood there silently. Then he slowly closed the door. The sound of the cold wind outside stopped. A silence descended inside the room. Gadadhar said very softly, if you know the whole truth, your life will no longer remain the same. Babu, Rudra said in a firm voice, I want to know the truth. The old man looked toward the window and sighed. Then he began to speak. About 50 years ago from today, Zamindar Bhavanaprasad used to live in this haveli. He was a very cruel man. No one had the courage to go against his word. But his daughter Nandini was entirely different, quiet, gentle, and very kind. Outside, a light breeze was blowing through the mist then. Gadadhar's voice slowly grew heavy. Nandini had loved a common boy. The boy's name was Arindam. He was a teacher at the village school. Though poor, he was a very honest man. Rudra was listening intently. They used to meet secretly, Gadadhar said, especially on winter nights, because back then everyone would go to sleep early. Nandini would stand on the roof of the bell tower and wait, and Arindam would enter the haveli through the back garden. Suddenly, the old man stopped. The shadow of fear descended upon his eyes. But one night the zamindar found out everything. Rudra asked softly, then? Gadadhar dried his lips and said, Arindam was captured and imprisoned in the secret chamber beneath this haveli. For 3 days he was tortured. Then the old man's voice trembled. His dead body was thrown into the river. The air in the room suddenly felt even colder. Rudra felt the hairs on his arms stand up. Gadadhar whispered, and Nandini, she became like a mad person. She didn't eat anything for 3 days, she only wept. Then, on a deep winter night, outside, the wind suddenly rose like a storm. The window shutters rattled and shook. Gadadhar looked around with panicked eyes. Then, in a very low voice, he said, her hanging body was found inside the bell tower. The room became silent. For a while no one said anything. Then Rudra slowly said, but people say her soul is still here. The old man's eyes suddenly grew strangely wide. In a trembling voice he said, because before Nandini died she said one thing. What thing? Gadadhar whispered. She said, no one in this haveli will find peace. Every winter she will return, and the day her truth is revealed, that day the life of the last heir of this family will also change. Rudra's heart gave a sudden jolt. The last heir? Right now he was the only living member of the landlord family in this haveli. Right then, dong, the sound of the bell drifted in again. It was afternoon. But that bell had been broken for many years. Almost weeping in terror, Gadadhar said, she has awakened, Babu, after all these years she has returned again. Suddenly the footsteps of someone were heard from the corridor. Slowly. Thud, 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 as if someone was walking with wet feet. Both Rudra and Gadadhar held their breath and stared at the door. Then, from under the door, a reddish liquid slowly crept inside. No, it wasn't water, it was blood. Looking at the red liquid slowly rolling in from under the door, Gadadhar suddenly stepped back. His lips were trembling. His eyes were almost popping out in terror. No, no, it has started again, the old man began to whisper. Rudra stood frozen, staring for a while. The red liquid was slowly spreading across the floor. In the dim light, it looked exactly like blood. A metallic scent was also blending into the air. Rudra summoned his courage and moved toward the door. In a trembling voice, Gadadhar said, don't open the door, Babu, please don't open it, but Rudra did not stop. There was fear inside his chest, yet the intense pull of knowing the unknown truth was becoming greater than that fear. He slowly placed his hand on the door panel. The wood was unnaturally cold, as if touching ice. Then kriak, the door opened. The corridor outside was completely empty. There was no one. Only the long dark path and the old lamps on the wall were flickering as they burned, but the most terrifying thing was something else. There were actually bloodstains on the floor. Wet, fresh blood. That blood went straight along the corridor toward the northern stairs. Rudra's throat went dry. In a muffled voice from behind, Gadadhar said, that path goes to the secret chamber below. Secret chamber? The old man slowly nodded his head. Where Arindam was kept imprisoned. Outside, the old windows were rattling in the cold wind then. Somewhere distant, a crow was cawing in a harsh voice. Rudra stood silently for a few moments. Then in a firm voice he said, I will go there. Gadadhar seemed to suddenly forget to breathe. No, Chhatababu, no one has gone to that place for many years. After the zamindar died, that path was closed down. Why? The old man remained silent for a while, then he said very softly, because in the middle of the night human screams could be heard from that chamber. The air in the corridor suddenly felt even colder. Rudra took a lamp in his hand. Then he slowly began to move, following the bloodstains. Forced by circumstances, Gadadhar also began to walk behind him. The old stairs were covered in dust. With every step taken, a harsh creaking sound arose. As they descended lower, the air was growing heavy. The smell of damp earth, the rotten smell of old wood, and somewhere the faint scent of incense, as if someone had prayed here many years ago. Reaching the end of the stairs, they stopped. Before them was a massive iron door. Rust had formed over the door, but the surprising thing was the door was slightly open. Rudra whispered, Who opened this? Gadadhar gave no answer. The fear of death was clear on his face then. Suddenly, a sound drifted from inside. Thud, 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 as if someone was slowly hitting from inside the wall. A tremor rose inside Rudra's chest, but composed himself and pushed the door open. And instantly, a gust of ice-cold air rushed out. Inside the room, it was completely dark. As Rudra held the lamp high, the scene slowly became clear. Iron chains hung on the walls of the entire room, darkish, dried stains on the floor. And in one corner lay a wooden chair, its armrests tied with thick ropes. In a trembling voice, Gadadhar said, Arindam was kept tied to this very chair. Rudra slowly moved forward inside the room. His breathing was growing heavy. Suddenly he stopped, because something was written on the wall, scratched with fingernails, very old, yet still clear. Rudra held the lamp close, then in a trembling voice he read, Nandini is innocent. The air in the room suddenly froze. Right then, the door behind them slammed shut with a tremendous sound. Bang! Gadadhar screamed out. Rudra rushed over and tried to open the door, but it was as if someone had blocked the door from the outside. Suddenly, whispers began to spread inside the entire room, many voices together. Someone was crying. Someone was asking for help. Someone was cursing. In terror, Rudra began to look around. Then he saw someone was standing in the dark corner of the room. A white sari, long hair, Nandini, but this time her face could be seen. And seeing that face, Rudra's body went numb, because blood was trickling from both of Nandini's eyes. And her lips were slowly moving. She whispered, They didn't just murder Arindam. They killed me too, they killed me too. Nandini's voice slowly began to echo inside the entire dark chamber. Rudra felt as if he had lost control over his own body. The lamp was almost slipping from his hand, not from the cold, but from fear. The heartbeat inside his chest was so loud that it felt as though everyone in this silent room could hear that sound. Gadadhar had collapsed onto the ground. His lips had turned dry and white. In a trembling voice he kept saying, Forgive us, Ma, please forgive us. Nandini slowly moved forward. The lower portion of her white sari was soaked in blood. Through the gaps of her long hair, her pale face could be seen. But the most terrifying part was her eyes. Blood was slowly trickling down from both her eyes. Yet deep within those eyes there was a strange sorrow, as if the pain accumulated over many years had still not granted her release. With great effort, Rudra said, Who killed you? Nandini's lips moved slowly. My own family? Suddenly, the air in the entire room grew heavy. The chains on the wall began to shake on their own. Clank, clank, clank. In terror, Gadadhar closed his eyes shut. Nandini began to say in a whisper, After murdering Arindam, I stood against my father. I wanted to reveal the whole truth to the villagers. But they were afraid because the zamindar's honor would be ruined. Her voice was slowly breaking. That night they brought me to this very room. Rudra's throat went dry. Then, the blood in Nandini's eyes seemed to grow even darker. I was poisoned. In an instant, the entire room became dead silent. Rudra felt a cold chill run down his spine. Then they hung my dead body in the bell tower so that everyone would think I committed suicide outside, A storm had risen by then. Even the walls of that underground room were shaking. Rudra was slowly beginning to realize for 200 years everyone had been listening to the wrong story. Nandini did not commit suicide. She was murdered. Suddenly, Nandini slowly raised her hand. Her trembling finger pointed toward a corner of the room. The truth is still hidden. Holding the lamp, Rudra moved toward that direction. Beside the wall lay an old wooden box covered in dust. A thick layer of cobwebs had accumulated over the box. It seemed as though no one had even touched it for many years. As Rudra opened the box, the smell of dust wafted out from inside. Within it were a few old letters, a dried rose, and a leather-bound diary. Written on the cover of the diary, Nandini Devi. Rudra's hand trembled. He slowly opened the diary. The first few pages contained ordinary writings, the story of walking by the riverbank, the winter morning mist, meeting Arindam for the first time, small memories of love. But as the pages went on, the writings became darker. In one place, written with a trembling hand, "Father has found out. I told Arindam to hide. But I am very scared." On another page, "It has been 3 days today. I cannot find Arindam anywhere. As night falls, I hear human screams from the room below." Rudra's chest was growing heavy. Then he reached the final page. The page was half soaked in bloodstains. Reading the last lines written with a trembling hand, Rudra's breath caught. "If anyone finds this diary, then know this: the curse of this haveli is not over yet, because Arindam did not die." The air in the room seemed to stop in an instant. Rudra slowly raised his head. "What?" Nandini was then staring at him with still eyes. Her lips moved slowly. "He is still here." Right then, the sound of heavy breathing drifted from the dark corner of the room. Who, as if someone was breathing for the first time after many years. Gadadhar screamed out in terror. Rudra slowly held the lamp toward that dark corner, and as the light fell upon it, his body froze. Tied to the wall with thick chains, a skeleton was standing. But the most terrifying thing was, the skeleton's head was slowly rising upward. And from its empty eye sockets, a liquid as black as darkness was trickling down. The skeleton in the dark corner was slowly raising its head. The iron chains were rattling with a clanking sound. It felt as if some terrifying thing was waking up after a sleep of many years. Rudra's hand began to tremble. The light of the lamp held in his hand was also flickering. In that yellow light, the dry bones of the skeleton looked as though death was still trapped inside them. In terror, Gadadhar moved against the wall. No, this cannot be," the old man began to mutter. Suddenly, the temperature of the entire room dropped even lower. Rudra could see his own breath. White vapor, like cold mist, was coming out of his mouth. But even amidst that mist, he could clearly see the skeleton's chest was rising and falling very slowly, as if it wasn't dead, but rather alive. Then a broken sound came out from its throat, as if a dry voice unused for many years wanted to speak again. A tremor rose inside Rudra's chest. Arindam. As soon as the name was uttered, a look of strange agony appeared on Nandini's face. She slowly closed her eyes, and right then the shadows on the walls of the entire room stirred, as if hundreds of people were writhing inside the darkness. Weeping, Gadadhar said, "We have sinned. This haveli is cursed." Suddenly, both hands of the skeleton jerked and came up forward. The chains pulled tight and shook. Clangy. Rudra stepped back in fear. But at that very moment, a severe pain suddenly started inside his head. He pressed his forehead, and then the scene began to change before his eyes. It felt as though he was no longer in this dark room. He was standing in that very night of 200 years ago. Intense cold all around. Mist was blowing in the stormy wind. In the courtyard of the haveli, a few men stood holding torches. In their midst sat a youth on his knees. A body soaked in blood, marks of injury on the face. Arindam. Standing before him was Zamindar Bhavaniprasad, ruthless anger in his eyes. "Being an ordinary school teacher, how do you find the courage to love my daughter?" The Zamindar's roar drifted into the ears. Arindam raised his head with difficulty. His lips were soaked in blood, yet he said slowly, "Love is not a crime." The next moment, the Zamindar hit him on the face with a stick in tremendous rage. Arindam fell to the ground. Standing at a distance, Nandini was crying. Her 2 hands were held tightly by a few maidservants. She was screaming, "Let him go, please don't kill him." But no one listened. In the stormy wind, that weeping was fading into the mist. Then Rudra saw Arindam was being dragged down to this very underground chamber. The door closed, darkness, screams, the sound of chains, and ceaseless torture. Rudra's breathing was growing heavy. It felt as if he himself was feeling everything. Every hit, every pain. Suddenly the scene changed again. This time he saw Nandini. Something had been brought and kept in a silver vessel before her. The zamindar's wife was saying in a cold voice, "Drink this. All pain will end." There were no tears in Nandini's eyes anymore, only emptiness. She slowly picked up the vessel of poisoned milk in her hand, and at that exact moment Nandini seemed to suddenly look toward Rudra, directly. As if she knew Rudra was watching everything. Her lips moved slowly, "Free the truth." Suddenly everything went dark. Panting, Rudra came back to reality. He was still standing in that subterranean room. His forehead was soaked in sweat. Even though the surroundings were cold as ice, Nandini was staring at him with still eyes. "You have seen," she whispered. Rudra slowly nodded his head. Inside his chest now there was not just fear. A strange sorrow had also accumulated. How much weeping had been trapped inside the walls of this haveli for 200 years? Suddenly, thud, the sound of something massive falling occurred somewhere upstairs. Then the screams of people drifted from a distance. In terror, Gadadhar said, "Something has happened up in the haveli." Right then, the walls of the underground room shook. Mortar and plaster began to break and fall. And from the empty eye sockets of the skeleton, black smoke slowly began to come out. That smoke began to spread inside the entire room. And from its midst, a deep, inhuman voice drifted. "This time no one will survive. This time, no one will survive." That inhuman voice slowly began to echo across the walls of the entire underground chamber. It felt as though the sound was not coming from a human throat. As if the weeping of many dead souls had merged together to become a single voice. The black smoke slowly emerged from the skeleton's body and began to spread across the entire room. Rudra felt that it was becoming difficult to breathe. The air had grown heavy, the smell of dead earth all around, and hidden in its midst was the intense stench of something decaying. Gadadhar sat on the ground, trembling. "That is not Arindam," the old man said, weeping. "That is no longer human." Nandini slowly lowered her head. The blood from her eyes fell onto the ground, creating darkish stains. 200 years of hatred, pain, betrayal, she whispered. Everything combined has turned him into darkness. Suddenly, two glowing eyes appeared inside the black smoke. Then a form slowly began to take shape, like a human. But not entirely human. A tall, distorted body, hands like black shadows, and only darkness in place of a face. Rudra's body froze. That shadow figure slowly looked toward him. Then, in an instant, it lunged forward. Rudra screamed and fell to the side. The shadow struck the wall right over his head. Bang! The old bricks cracked and dust showered down. In terror, Gadadhar ran toward the door, but the door did not open. The air inside the room seemed to whirl around like crazy. The lamp went out. Everything sank into darkness. Only those two glowing eyes could be seen. Rudra lay on the ground, panting. Just then, a voice suddenly drifted into his ears. Very familiar, very close. "Rudra, run," he started. This was his mother's voice, but his mother had died many years ago. Suddenly, small scenes began to float within the darkness. He could see a night from his childhood, winter. His mother was holding him tight against her chest, crying. And she was saying, "Leave this haveli and go away, no one is happy here." Rudra's breathing grew heavy. He had never been able to recall this memory before. Then why was he remembering everything today? Right then, Nandini suddenly screamed out, "Rudra, your blood is what awakened him." The black shadow stopped again. Its glowing eyes now stared fixedly at Rudra. The air in the room froze in an instant. With difficulty, Rudra said, "My blood." Nandini slowly moved forward. In her eyes now there was deep sorrow instead of fear. "You are not just the last heir of this family. You carry the blood of Bhavanaprasad." Rudra's heart gave a jolt. Nandini whispered, "The blood that created this curse, that very blood has made it stronger in every generation." Suddenly, the pain started inside Rudra's head again. More memories began to return. He could see his father was standing in front of the bell tower in the middle of the night, trembling with fear, then locking the door with his own hands, and saying he can never be allowed to wake up again. The scene faded away. Rudra began to pant. What had his family been hiding all this time? Weeping, Gadadhar said, "In every generation one person has died. Chhatababu, someone burned in fire, someone drowned in the river, someone went mad. This is the punishment of this haveli." Right then, the black shadow suddenly roared. The entire chamber shook. Then it said in a distorted voice, "I will end every one of them." Within moments, the shadow lunged toward Gadadhar. The old man screamed out. Rudra rushed over and pulled him away. But the shadow's hand brushed against Gadadhar's shoulder, and instantly the old man's body became cold as ice. His face pale, his eyes still, trembling, Gadadhar fell to the ground. Holding him in terror, Rudra said, "Gadadhar?" The old man opened his eyes with difficulty. His lips were trembling. "The bell tower," he whispered. "The real power of the curse is there." Then, with a trembling hand, he extended a small key toward Rudra. An old, darkish key. This key was only given to the people of the Zamindar family. As Rudra took the key in his hand, he felt the key was unnaturally hot, as if it had been kept inside a fire for many years. With his last strength, Gadadhar said, "Inside the bell tower the truth is hidden." Right then, lightning struck upstairs. Bang! The entire haveli shook. And from somewhere distant, the sound of that bell drifted in again, dong, 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 but this time the sound was much heavier than before. Filled with much rage, it felt as though someone was about to be released after many years. While coming up from the underground chamber, Rudra repeatedly felt as if the entire haveli had changed. The same walls, the same corridors, the same old doors, yet everything looked different now. It felt as though inside every brick, every shadow, and every breath of wind of this house, a living darkness lay hidden. Outside, a severe winter storm was raging then. Mist was entering through the cracks of the windows and had covered the long corridor like white smoke. The distant lamps were flickering, and from time to time, the entire haveli was shaking with the sound of the bell. Dong, 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 Rudra was walking fast. In his hand, he firmly held that old key. Behind him, Gadadhar was walking slowly, but his breathing had grown heavy. Ever since the shadow had brushed against his body, the old man's face had turned unnaturally pale. Suddenly, while passing in front of a mirror on one side of the corridor, Rudra stopped, because he did not see his own reflection in the mirror. Instead, standing there was Nandini, white sari, blood-soaked eyes. She slowly raised her hand and gestured toward the stairs leading up. Then she vanished. A tremor rose inside Rudra's chest. In a low voice, Gadadhar said, "She is showing you the way." Rudra gave no answer. He just moved toward the stairs. The bell tower was in the highest part of the haveli. The place had been closed for many years. No one went there. Because the villagers believed deep in the winter nights dead people spoke inside that room. The stairs were covered in dust. With every step taken, a harsh creaking sound came out from within the wood. Kriak, kriak, lightning struck outside. In a flash of light, Rudra saw the eyes of the old portraits on the walls seem to be staring at him. He quickly averted his eyes. Then finally they arrived in front of the bell tower. A massive wooden door, tied with thick iron chains, and in the middle of the door was a padlock that had turned black. Rudra slowly raised the key. His hand was trembling. For some reason he felt, once this door opened, nothing would remain the same as before. From behind, Gadadhar whispered, "Think about it once, Chhatababu. Knowing the whole truth is not always good." Rudra stood silently for a while. Then he said very softly, "If 200 years of weeping are trapped on the other side of this door, then today it needs to end." He inserted the key into the lock. Click, a heavy sound occurred. Then the chains fell to the ground on their own. Clank. Outside, for a moment the storm grew even more intense. Rudra slowly pushed the door open. Kriak, an ice-cold wind rushed out from inside. And mixed in that wind was the scent of old adder. As if some woman had stood in this room for the last time many years ago. Inside the room it was completely dark. Only in the middle hung the massive old bell. A 200-year-old black metallic bell. But looking at it, Rudra's heart gave a jolt. Because reddish stains could be seen on the bell, like blood. Rudra slowly moved forward. And right then he saw in a corner of the room was a wooden rocking chair. The chair was slowly rocking back and forth on its own. There was no one, yet it was rocking. Creaka, creaka. Suddenly, a female voice drifted in. "You have finally come." Rudra slowly turned around. Nandini was standing by the window. In the light of the lightning outside, her pale face could be seen. Today there was no blood in her eyes, instead a strange peace. She said very softly, "My last night was spent in this very room." With difficulty, Rudra asked, "What actually happened here?" Nandini remained silent for a while, then she slowly looked toward the bell. "They could not kill Arindam," she said, "because before death something else had awakened within him." Rudra's chest trembled. "Something else," Nandini's lips quivered. "Beneath this haveli an even older darkness lay asleep which grows powerful with human hatred, blood, and betrayal." Lightning struck outside again. The shadows inside the room shook. "Arindam's agony awakened that darkness," Nandini whispered. "And from then on, he was no longer entirely human." Rudra slowly moved closer to the bell. It felt to him as though the bell was alive, as if someone was breathing from inside. Suddenly, dong, the bell rang on its own. Rudra pressed his hands over his ears. It felt as if his entire head would burst. And along with that sound, the floor of the room slowly began to crack. In terror, Gadadhar screamed out, "The ground is breaking!" Black smoke began to come out from beneath the cracks. And from the midst of that smoke, a hand slowly rose upward. Not a human hand. A long, distorted black hand. Then another one, as if hundreds of things were imprisoned beneath the ground. Terror appeared in Nandini's eyes. Looking at Rudra, she screamed out, "Close the door right now!" But by then, it was too late. Because a deep roar drifted up from beneath the ground, and the entire bell tower suddenly shook and plunged into darkness. As the entire bell tower plunged into darkness, Rudra felt the ground was shaking beneath his feet. No, it wasn't just shaking. It felt as if the entire haveli was slowly rising and falling with the breath of some massive invisible power. Black smoke had spread all around, so thick that even his own hand was not visible. Only whispering sounds were drifting from within the darkness. Hundreds of voices. Someone was crying. Someone was asking for help. Someone else was saying the same words over and over in a low voice. "Blood, blood, blood." A cold fear froze deep inside Rudra's chest. Suddenly, someone grabbed his hand tightly and pulled. As he started, he heard Nandini's voice, "Come with me." Nandini's hand was cold as ice, yet there was a strange safety in that touch. Rudra followed behind her through the mist. The sound of Gadadhar panting could be heard from behind. The cracks in the ground were rapidly growing larger. The black hands were rising upward one after another. Long, dry fingers, in some places bones could be seen. It felt as if the dead people wanted to emerge from beneath the earth. Right then, bang! A wall on one side of the bell tower collapsed. Cold wind and mist rushed inside like a storm. And in that moment, what Rudra saw in the light of the lightning froze the blood in his chest. Standing in the middle of the room was that black shadow figure. But this time it was much bigger than before, almost as high as the ceiling. Countless faces were moving inside its body. Someone was screaming, someone was weeping, someone was asking for release. It felt as though all the dead souls of 200 years were trapped inside that darkness. Rudra's breath was catching. The shadow slowly turned its head and looked at him. Then it roared, "The blood of Bhavaniprasad must be ended." With that sound, the glass of the entire bell tower shattered. Gadadhar sat down on the ground, pressing his hands over his ears. Rudra stopped even as he tried to step back, because suddenly some strange scenes began to float inside his head again. He could see that very night of 200 years ago. Beneath the floor of the bell tower stood Zamindar Bhavaniprasad and a few priests. Before them was a massive black pit. Smoke was coming out from inside the pit. One of the priests was saying, trembling with fear, "It will not be right to awaken this, Zamindar Mahashai." But there was madness in Bhavaniprasad's eyes then. "No one can destroy my family," he said. "Whoever stands in the way, this power will end them." Then blood, a lot of blood, someone's scream, and something shifting inside that black pit. Panting, Rudra came back to reality. His body was shaking not from the cold but from panic. He slowly began to realize this curse was not just revenge. This was created by his own family. Looking at him, Nandini said, "They wanted to use a forbidden power, but they could not control it." Lightning struck outside. For a moment, the entire bell tower lit up. And in that light, Rudra saw beneath the cracks in the floor there actually was a massive pit. A dark, bottomless abyss. Black smoke was coming out from right there. And deep inside that abyss, two red eyes were glowing, slowly, fixedly, as if it had been waiting for someone for many years. A severe burning sensation suddenly started inside Rudra's chest. With difficulty, he collapsed onto his knees. The veins in his hands were turning darkish. It felt as if some invisible poison was spreading inside his body. In panic, Nandini moved forward. "No," she whispered, "this is not supposed to start so quickly." With difficulty, Rudra said, "What is happening to me?" Deep sorrow appeared in Nandini's eyes. "The curse is accepting you." Right then, the black shadow figure suddenly roared, and extending from inside its body, hundreds of hands reached out toward Rudra. Come with us. End the inheritance of blood." Weeping, Gadadhar screamed, "Run, Chhatababu," but Rudra could not move. His eyes were slowly growing blurry, and in the midst of that blurry darkness he could see something was rising up from beneath the abyss. Very slowly, very massive, and the entire bell tower was shaking with the sound of its breath. What was slowly rising up from that bottomless abyss beneath the floor of the bell tower could not be described in any language. Rudra first heard only the sound of its breath, deep, heavy, as if some sleeping demon hundreds of years old was waking up. Then those two red eyes became clearer within the darkness. Not eyes, two burning fires. There was so much hatred in that gaze that Rudra felt even the blood inside his chest turning cold. The cracks in the ground were rapidly spreading. The entire bell tower was shaking. The old wood of the walls was breaking and falling one after another. Outside, the storm had grown even more terrifying. It felt as if nature itself was afraid of this night. Nandini stared at the abyss with panicked eyes. Her lips were trembling. "No," she said very softly, "he is fully waking up." Rudra tried to stand up with difficulty. The veins in his hands had now turned completely black. It felt as though fire and ice were spreading together inside his body. He gritted his teeth and said, "What is that?" Nandini remained silent for a while. Then she said slowly, "This is not a spirit. This is darkness born of human sin." The air in the room seemed to grow even heavier in an instant. Nandini slowly began to speak. "Many years ago, beneath this landlord mansion, there was an ancient place of worship. People believed that a power lay sleeping there which survives on human fear, greed, and hatred." Lightning struck outside. In a flash of light, Rudra saw massive black fingers were emerging from within the abyss. They were like human hands, but unnaturally long, and the nails looked as though they could cut through stone. Nandini whispered, "Bhavanaprasad wanted to use that power. He thought this darkness would give him immortal power. But he didn't understand, darkness never becomes anyone's slave." Suddenly, a hideous roar rose from beneath the abyss. The entire bell tower shook, and along with that sound, the screams of countless people drifted inside Rudra's head. He sat down on the ground, pressing his hands over his ears. The scene rapidly began to change before his eyes. He could see the deaths that had occurred in this haveli over many years. Someone burning in fire, someone hitting their own head against the wall like a mad person, someone walking toward the river in the darkness of the night. And after every death, that black abyss was growing larger, more powerful. Panting, Rudra opened his eyes, his lips were trembling. "All this happened because of our family?" Nandini slowly nodded her head, tears were glistening in her eyes. "Your family created this curse, and now it wants you?" Right then, Gadadhar suddenly stepped forward. In the old man's eyes now, there was not just fear. The mark of a strange resolution had appeared. In a trembling voice, he said, "Chhatababu, you must survive." Rudra looked at him in surprise. "But how?" Gadadhar slowly pulled out a small brass box from inside the cloth around his waist. An old box, faded. Strange symbols were drawn upon it. Nandini's eyes grew wide in an instant. "This is still here." Gadadhar slowly nodded his head. "Your mother gave this to me before her death." Rudra's heart gave a jolt. "My mother," the old man said very softly, "she knew the truth." Lightning struck outside again. Gadadhar opened the box. Inside was a small silver amulet. A red stone was embedded in the middle of the amulet. But the surprising thing was, the stone seemed to be burning from the inside. In panic, Nandini said, "If that is used," Gadadhar stopped her. "There is no other way, Ma." Then he looked toward Rudra. "This amulet will be able to stop your blood curse for some time. But remember," the old man's eyes welled up, "before this night ends, you have to make a decision. Either you destroy this darkness, or you yourself will become a part of it." Right then, something massive rose up from within the abyss. Slowly, with a heavy sound, And seeing that scene, Rudra's breath stopped, because that was not a creature, nor was it a human. Rather, a massive living darkness created by joining the distorted bodies of countless people. Hundreds of faces were stuck to its body. Someone was screaming, someone was weeping, someone was asking for release. And in the middle of that terrifying entity, Arindam's face could be clearly seen, but his eyes were completely black. He slowly looked toward Rudra and said, "Come with us, come with us." Those words emerging from Arindam's distorted face slowly began to echo inside the entire bell tower. Rudra stood frozen. The thing standing before his eyes could not be called human. Countless faces were stuck across the body of that massive dark entity. Someone was screaming in agony, someone was weeping, someone else was staring with empty eyes. It felt as if all the dead souls of 200 years had merged to turn into a living nightmare. And trapped in the middle of that nightmare was Arindam. A severe pain suddenly rose inside Rudra's chest. Because he could understand, Arindam had not turned completely into darkness. Somewhere inside him, the human was still alive. Nandini felt it too. Her eyes welled up. Slowly stepping forward, she whispered, "He can be saved." Rudra looked at her, startled. "What?" Nandini's lips were trembling. "He hasn't become entirely a monster. For all these years he has fought even from within this darkness." Outside, the winter storm was growing even more intense. The windows of the bell tower were shaking with a tremendous sound, and the black smoke emerging from beneath the abyss was slowly covering the entire room. Standing with difficulty, Gadadhar said, "But to free him, this curse must be ended, Chhatababu." The veins in Rudra's hands had now turned even blacker. It felt to him as though something was slowly waking up inside his body. Darkness, rage, hatred. He gritted his teeth and said, "How?" Gadadhar remained silent for a while. Then he said very softly, "Your mother knew everything." Rudra's heart gave a jolt. The old man slowly began to speak. "Before dying, she told me, one day the last heir of this haveli will return. And that very person will decide whether the curse lives or ends." Lightning struck outside. In a flash of light, Rudra saw Nandini was staring at him with still eyes. There was no fear in her eyes now, only waiting. Gadadhar took the silver amulet out of the brass box and placed it in Rudra's hand. As soon as he touched the amulet, Rudra felt the black burning sensation inside his body lessened a bit. The red stone of the amulet was slowly growing bright. Right then, a memory returned inside his head again. He could see his mother was standing in front of the bell tower deep in the night. This same amulet was in her hand, panic in her eyes. And standing beside her was little Rudra. His mother was saying in a low voice, "If the darkness ever returns, this amulet will show you the way. But remember, darkness cannot be defeated with power. Only sacrifice can stop it." The memory faded away. Panting, Rudra came back to reality. His hand was trembling. "Sacrifice?" he whispered. Nandini slowly nodded her head. "This darkness is bound to blood," she said. "The blood that created it, with that very blood it must be ended." A tremor rose inside Rudra's chest. He was slowly beginning to understand what Nandini meant. Gadadhar's eyes welled up. "Chhatababu," the old man said in a trembling voice, "if you close the abyss, then perhaps you will not survive." For a moment, the entire bell tower became dead silent. Only the sound of the storm outside, and the heavy breathing of that dark entity. Rudra slowly raised his head. There was fear in his eyes, yet deep within that fear a firmness was beginning to be born. 200 years of weeping. Countless deaths, a cursed inheritance. Perhaps today the time had come for everything to end. Right then the dark entity suddenly roared. The entire bell tower shook. Hundreds of hands emerged from its massive body. All those hands reached out toward Rudra at once. "You are ours. You belong to the darkness. You are the blood of Bhavanaprasad." Rudra pressed his hands over his ears. It felt as if thousands of people were screaming inside his head. The red light of the amulet began to flash rapidly. In panic, Nandini screamed, "Rudra, make the decision right now." Suddenly, something like massive black roots emerged from within the abyss and wrapped around Rudra's legs, cold as ice. In an instant, that darkness began to climb up his body. Rudra screamed out in agony. The pupils of his eyes were slowly turning black, and in that moment, Nandini rushed over and grabbed his hand tightly. For the first time, a 200